What's up, everyone? Today we're going to do what might end up being kind of a challenging repotting of this juniper. This tree belongs to a client of mine, and I've been working on it for the last couple of years in terms of the branching. It is a collected juniper trunk. I believe it was a Western Juniper, and it's been grafted with Kishu Juniper. So today I'm going to take it out of the pot, see what's going on down here, and then try to get it into a more show-worthy pot at the angle that I really want to see the tree. So the first thing I want to just point out is that whenever I see something like this, sort of an auxiliary attachment mechanism holding a tree in place, it makes me think that the person who previously potted the tree had a difficult time getting it to stay in the container because the root ball was not well established. So I've been working on this tree with my client for about 2 years, and it hasn't been repotted during that time, but it has been growing nicely and it's relatively healthy. So I expect to find a good number of roots. But the challenge with material like this is that because junipers, especially wild junipers, have lifelines, it's very possible or almost a certainty that all of the roots are coming off of just these two sections or something like that. And that means that using the fine roots that have been established and the soil mass itself as a way of stabilizing the tree, particularly because it's also relatively tall, is not necessarily going to get the job done. And that's kind of why I see that these props have been added and it's been strapped around the pot to maintain the stability. So I'm going to take it out, see what the root ball looks like, and then try to figure out exactly how to anchor it in the container, keeping it nice and sturdy, and utilizing really hopefully being able to utilize the wood of the composition rather than just the fine roots and the soil to stabilize it, which I think is why it needed these extra additions post repotting, however many years ago it was put into this container. So I've got the extra props off and I'm kind of assessing how stable is this, how strong is the connection between this root right here and the trunk. It looks like this part is probably going to relatively easily break off, which would be kind of unfortunate because obviously the base of this has rotted away, but this is kind of visually indicating the size of the base, whereas if we look at it from over here, the size of the base kind of diminishes because of that. So I'm going to have to find a way to address this, especially if it ends up getting broken off, as it's already well rotted dead wood. So when you're cutting the existing tie wires off of a tree, you need to make sure that all of the wires are cut to the point where they're not going to impede you from removing the tree from the container. So I've cut these tie wires that are holding the screen. The roots will normally be wrapped around the screen, so the screen's not going to separate from the root ball. And I've bent the edges into the large hole there, and then I've bent out the tie wires and cut them flush so that they don't get bent over. And that means that these should be able to just slip straight up out of those holes once I have the tree separated from the side walls of the container. I'm going to use this gardening scythe, which has like teeth like this, and I'll use this to separate the roots that are along the edges of the wall from the container so that I can easily tilt it out. While I'm doing this, since the tie wires have been severed, I need to kind of keep an eye on this to make sure that it doesn't fall out on me, because this is a relatively large and tippy composition. So I'm just gonna kind of keep one hand on the trunk while I work on the root ball. With 3 sides cut, 2 short and 1 long, I should be able to get this out of the container with relative ease. I use the word should because there's always some surprises. But this container doesn't have a lip that wraps over or anything like that. So just kind of creating that room. I haven't cut the 4th side because it's usually not necessary. And I should now just be able to tip the entire tree and root ball out of the container gently. Usually, particularly if you have concerns about the connection between the trunk and the roots, you don't want to be using the trunk as a lever to remove the tree from the container. And 1, because you can split roots, and 2, because if the roots are at all compromised already from a structural perspective, in other words, there's not a lot of wood there, then you can actually kill a tree by doing something like that. So I'm gonna just kind of gently lean this over and see if it separates, which it is. And I'm not putting any pressure on the trunk here. I'm just sort of allowing the force of gravity there to separate the two. So now that I have this out of the pot, I'm going to start by working on the bottom of the root ball. And this is standard technique for repotting a tree that already has an established root ball. So I'm going to kind of tilt it over here off the side of my table and hold the bottom plane of the root ball perfectly vertical here. And I can then use either a 3-prong rake or a root hook, or in my case, a pair of bent nose tweezers, to just kind of remove the mat of roots that's on the bottom. All right, so what I've done here basically is just lightly comb off that mat of roots that's covering the bottom, that was covering the bottom of the pot, scissor it off after teasing it out a little bit with the bent nose tweezers. You can use a 3-prong root rake or a root hook, but the root hook tends to get a little bit too far into the root ball. So we're just trying to kind of keep this flat, which allows us to use it later for stabilizing the tree, or at least partially stabilizing the tree. Now that the bottom's done, I'm going to go ahead and set it back down flat on its bottom. With the tree stabilized using this piece of wood just sitting on the table here, I am going to begin working on the top and the sides of the root ball. And I'm using my bent nose tweezers again to just sort of gently rake off the accumulated coat of weeds and organic material that's on the top here, as well as kind of teasing out any circling roots. But because I already cut the roots on this side, there's no circling roots there. I'm not trying to go in here to really break up the root ball, because I know that this tree has been growing well and that it's already been repotted in bonsai soil. Really what I'm doing here is working on just removing the accumulated debris from the top, which you might do in a separate operation in the fall rather than during repotting time, or you can accomplish it at the same time as you're repotting like I am doing here. Taking off the old tie wires. All right, well, now that I've got this kind of teased out, I can give it a little bit of a spin and show you guys what I'm trying to accomplish here. So basically I've removed all of the circling roots from the outside of the root ball and just sort of teased out the top, removed all the weeds, removed all the old organic matter, and now I can start thinking about whether or not I can get this into a different container. And using this using this board to prop it up. It's actually not quite at the angle that I want it at yet, but it just allows for easier work on the root ball without having to use one of your arms to hold up such a kind of tall tree. I want to see if I can get it into this pot that my client gave me, and it's a really nice handmade pot. Already has some patina on it. I think it matches the style of the tree pretty well, but it looks like one of the challenges is going to be that some of these roots, particularly this one, which paradoxically seems to be coming off of this piece of dead wood, but obviously isn't. So I'm going to do a little bit of work here on the root ball and see if I can kind of reduce this section, because that will allow me to get the tree further over and back towards this side of this container so that there's a little bit of a balance going on. And because this is a 3-footed pot, I need to make sure that I don't create a situation where it's too tippy for it to be practical for the owner. So what I'm looking for here is this root comes out, and obviously it's just going kind of under this piece of dead wood, which is kind of interesting actually, but it's not really going to be part of the composition. But as I look at it here, that I've kind of teased it out, there's a bunch of kind of small to medium-sized roots that are coming off right here, and those are going down here and kind of spreading out. So I know that, you know, this part of the root is creating part of the lifeline, but I can also see that there's small roots coming out here back further. So what I'm going to see if I can do is I'm going to tease this out a little bit more and then see if it looks reasonable for me to cut off this outer section, which is about 2 inches long, and will make it a lot easier to get it into the pot that I'm going for. The other thing to take into account is that this root obviously is live, and it's kind of going back off this direction, and this root appears to be alive as well. So this isn't the only thing that is sustaining it, but as I mentioned earlier with junipers, because the veins can be sort of one branch to one root, it's important for me to analyze how does this root actually interact with the foliage and the lifeline to make sure that by cutting off too much of this root, I'm not weakening some key part of the tree. So this is the whole bunch of roots that's coming off from this section. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that off because this isn't super substantial, and I can see that these roots coming from behind here are also relatively healthy and of decent size. So I'm going a little bit further here and still bare rooting this section. I'm not going to cut any of these roots. I'm actually going to just sort of wrap them back into the pot, but I want to remove the majority of the soil from this section so I know I can get it closer to the pot. So back to the pot and how it's going to fit, I can see as I stick this kind of in front of the root ball that I can now get the root ball kind of over towards this side, but I think I need to take off a little bit more right here to ensure that I don't run into problems on this side. All right, in order to gauge this, I'm going to now pick up the tree and sort of test fit it into the container and see how things look. Although I like the way that the base is sitting here, I'm going to need to do a lot more work on the root ball right there. And I think I want to try to shove it that way a little bit more, which means I need to take a little bit more soil off the right side. So another attempt at sticking it into the pot. And I'm trying to decide whether this angle is exactly right or not. All right, I think we're going to call that the correct angle. And as you can see, I still need to do a little bit of work on the root ball on the left side in order to get it to kind of slope down and look a little bit more natural in there. But I'm going to go ahead and anchor this in the pot. I've pulled out some 17 gauge galvanized steel wire here, and I am, since this pot is round and it has 3 holes, I'm actually putting 3 separate wires. The other thing I'm doing is with the wire, I'm creating a hard bend right here where it goes into the hole, and the wire is going to pull against the insides of those holes, but the hard bend will keep it from slipping. So we want to basically create a system where we don't have any slack in the wire on the bottom of the pot. And if you don't put that hard bend in, that kind of allows that. And the same thing is true if you're using too small a gauge wire or something that was more easily stretched like aluminum. I'm going to start off with a well sifted combination of akadama and lava here on the bottom. And this is sort of not particularly large particles. I could use a larger particle, but I'm using a higher percentage of lava than I might otherwise use to start, and just making sure that there's no dust in there. All right, so I've got my pot prepped with the steel wire here. I've got some extra chopsticks and some pieces of scrap. This is Alaskan yellow cedar, and I just cut it up, split it, same as you might use bamboo to potentially use as props for anchoring the tree. So I'm going to try to get the tree into the pot at the angle that I want it, and then I'll look at how I'm going to use these wires to make sure that it can't move even a millimeter. So I want the trunk here projecting out straight over 1 foot. So I'm using 2 feet as the front of the pot rather than using 1 foot as the front of the pot, which you know, from a visual standpoint isn't that much different, but from a stability standpoint, if I put the foot right here and then the next foot is way back here, it is prone to tip. So I've got this foot directly underneath this part of the tree to make sure that it has as much stability as possible, as most of the weight of the tree is headed that direction. For my first anchor point, what I've got going on here is that this nice woody live root is going to make a good place to keep this side of the root ball from popping up. So I've got a tie wire coming up from the hole that's almost directly underneath it. I'm going to tie that across using a piece of rubber to protect it. And then I am going to go ahead and attach it to this part. So this is the same wire, it's going underneath the pot. So I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to leave the tail of that wire over about at this position in case I need to use it to further stabilize anything. All right, I've got this tied in. There's 2 of the wires that were coming out of the hole that's directly underneath here just come up and loop over this large root. And basically the same thing here. The 2 wires that were coming up out of the hole that's right here come up and are tied together over this tall root. I then use the tail to tie it to, watch out for the dead wood. I then use the tail to tie that to this piece over here to further stabilize it, and added a secondary wire here. Now, the root ball itself is stable, but the tree is still a little bit wobbly because of the flexing between the root ball and the trunk. So I'm going to go ahead and chop the soil in here and finish the root part of the repotting, and then I'm actually going to stick a prop right here just for stability purposes. So in a show, I could just take the prop out, and the tree is stable enough, and it will continue to become more stable. But for growing purposes, I think it'll be better to make sure that it's even further stabilized from wind and whatnot. All right, with this anchored in the pot and the soil chopped in, I'm going to go ahead and give it a watering, and then I will work on the top dressing and stabilizing the tree further. And the last problem I'm going to solve is to deal with this sort of like propensity of a 3-footed pot to tip like this when it has something tall in it, which is kind of what you would normally put in a round pot like this. All right, so I took a couple of pieces of the same yellow cedar, and I just made this little kind of like the bottom of a box. And what I'm going to do now is take this black twine to basically strap this tree down to that board so that there's no chance that it can fall over. All right, tree repotted and secured in the pot, and as I said at the beginning, that was a relatively challenging repot just because of the tippy nature of the tree, getting the angle exactly right based on the branch work that I previously did, and then making sure that the client has success in terms of growing it. And if this wasn't a 3-legged pot, I wouldn't be nearly as concerned about it. But the pot is a really nice stylistic match to the tree, and so I wanted to use it, but it requires a little bit of extra engineering and caution in terms of the health of the tree. Hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have done some challenging repots so far this year, put them in the comments below, and we'll see you guys next time.